Kia ora tātou te whānau. We will get started. We've got about 40 people, but some people are in groups in one room. So there'll be a few people trickling in afterwards. So welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us. We've got members from the CID membership, from the NGO community. We've got some MFAT colleagues and some colleagues from the Pacific as well. And just a very brief introduction to Darrin Brinsden. Darrin has been working in Otago. This is his piece of research, and he approached us during COVID, actually, and or it's just before COVID, and it kind of coincided at a time where we were becoming very aware from our colleagues at Piango that digital connectivity, especially as COVID emerged, was becoming an absolute priority for the Pacific. And it was seen, and still is today, as the access, the ability to keep trading, to keep accessing markets, the ability to keep kids in education, even to sit over the shoulder of doctors and surgeons throughout the Pacific and advise local practitioners. So it's key, I think, not just to how we're doing development post-COVID, but also to the localisation agenda. And that's the thing that's really exciting to us. And so Darrin got in touch with CID. It was also at a time where I see Jackie's just joined us, Jackie Curry, when she was raising the issue from her organisation about the urgency for rolling out digital connectivity to rural and isolated areas. And the findings, as Darrin will explain in his research, are sobering. I mean, the patchy state of digital connectivity through the region is quite alarming. The barriers to it are quite specific, country by country, and it really does help us to determine how best to roll out our partnerships with our Pacific partners, our programs, if we understand better what the digital landscape is. So Darrin Brinsden, Darrin, I'm thrilled to have you come and talk to us about this research. It's really helped us, and I think it will really help our sector and others understand how to proceed from here in this sort of post-COVID environment. So Darrin, welcome, and look forward to hearing you talk about your research.
Thank you, Josie, and thank you to both the Council for International Development and Otago University for sponsoring this research. Kia ora tātou. Thank you all for joining us over this digital platform. This is exactly what we're talking about today. I'd just like to take a moment to reflect. Wouldn't it be great if all we needed to do is help each other out like we used to, jump on a plane, be there in a few hours, ready to be with each other face to face, kanohi te kanohi. Just imagine that for a moment. Do you remember what that was like? That's unfortunately not our current reality. COVID-19's shifted the way we do things. The reality has challenged the accepted norms in both the aid, the development, and the humanitarian sector. When it comes to both program design and program delivery, I'm sure all of you in this sector have stories about how things have shifted significantly over the last 12 months or so. Look, everyone needs connection to learn, to grow, and to challenge their status quo. And that's probably the core thesis I would put out there from this research. COVID-19 may have changed the way this currently happens, but there are alternatives worth considering. Digital access, the focus of this research, is one of those opportunities to consider. And if I look at the Lancet COVID-19 Commission statement to the General Assembly last year, they said that digital access is critical for inclusion. So if we think of that and think about what the opportunity opens up when we connect, when we can't be in the same place together, how do we do that? Well, it presents that opportunity to connect and inclusive or participatory dialogue, or what is commonly known across the Pacific nations as talanoa. A place where we can sit on a mat and share our stories. It doesn't fit neatly into a scheduled call or a funding window necessarily, or even an external outcome deadline. Engaging in talanoa digitally may mean conversation that starts in an email or in a call, may wander across many digital mediums, and then maybe even continue as we get the opportunity to connect with each other again face to face. That's something that I look forward to, and I hope you do too, because there's some real opportunity here to be able to have those deep face-to-face conversations. In the meantime, how often have you found yourself having more connected conversations over the last year? Have they been less hierarchical? Have they been purely digital? This is coming together on the talanoa, on the digital or virtual tapestry. In this way, digital access becomes another mat to come together on, to listen to each other as we tell our stories. Talanoa in this way opens up the opportunity to explore the vā, the space between, while we're connected far away. So, always lovely when you have trouble with your notes. It's 1 second. That engagement model has also shifted the way that NGOs and INGOs are able to meet the needs of their beneficiaries. People can't be in one place. The on-the-ground workforce is the people who are in country. Many INGOs and NGOs across this period have enacted their risk profile, plans, and have had to pull people out of countries and states. This means the on-the-ground workforce has a higher responsibility, and that's in line with the localisation agenda. It's been an opportunity to shift the strategic focus and approach to engagement with each other based on that trust in the local community. And as that's done, the relationships dynamics change. And that's where messy deliberate action speaks directly to localisation and provides an opening for a conversation on digital access across cultures. Digital access has become more than a nice to have. It's been excuse me. If we cast that digital net across the region covered by Piango states, it's sparsely populated. There's a large geographic area where we see that digital access varies from state to state, as Josie mentioned in her introduction. And digital opportunity is for people, both the CSOs and the NGOs and the Piango member states, to pool resources and share ideas for investment, for international organisations. Placing more trust in national actors and not being surprised when they can actually do the role. It does also, however, open up the talanoa to the value of local competency and the value of local capacity to deliver what funding and impact value looks like. And if we look at that in a digital sense, I've noted 3 principles that of relationship program and donor funding access and value that can ground that conversation. So if I look at a relationship conversation, if a party joining the virtual tapestry can only use text-based messaging, then all parties in the talanoa could engage using text-based messaging. That's an inclusive conversation. If all parties can engage on the virtual tapestry using video calling, then they can all engage in talanoa using video. Each of the above examples opens up an opportunity to explore the vā without compromising relationship. And if I have a look into program, what do we do when we co-design programs to suit digital access? How is it applicable to the peoples engaging in the talanoa? So a good example of that was part of the observations of this research is the Oceania Connect virtual conference hosted by Piango the CID, and the Australian Council for International Development. It brought people from NGOs, CSOs, academia and government from across the Pacific together in Talanoa on a virtual tapestry to explore the VAR. VSA, Volunteer Service Abroad volunteers, have also connected on the virtual tapestry to e-volunteer, moving their direct action volunteering from a person-to-person, face-to-face program to an e-volunteering program over the digital strategy, and in one case, mentoring a local resource to build and deliver a COVID-19 update program in Timor-Leste. What about bringing donor funding and donor value conversations into these digital principles? The donor or the funder may engage in the Talanoa taking place on the virtual tapestry, be part of the in-stream conversations, add their presence to the VAR. They could also, from a value perspective, collect digital information or markers. Making use of digital access can be used to show that value. For example, the collection of water flow rate volume information in a freshwater wash program may feed these value stories without actually having any human intervention, and that in turn contributes to the story of the Talanoa. So with all of these three principles in play, we have a rich virtual tapestry with conversations that are less hierarchical and tailored for the type of digital access available to each of the participants. Well, what do these digital foundations look like? Well, across the Pacific, as Josie has said, it's a little sobering. There are some states that have very good digital access: New Caledonia, Fiji, Tonga, Vanuatu, Samoa, and Guam. Each of these states, each of the countries in that top band that are suited to real-time video and voice are connected via fibre. The green side is how quickly they can get to New Zealand and back. The blue side is how quickly they can get to the United States and back. The International Telecommunications Union tells us that anything under 150 milliseconds, or somewhere around 3/4 of the way up that 200 line, is suitable for real-time voice and video. What does that do to program design? What does that do to connection with your program partners? The middle grouping have a longer delay time to each of these places, New Zealand and the US. And that's great for rich and dynamic websites and apps. So what am I talking about there? The Facebooks, the WhatsApps, the websites that may have a form to fill out for value, donor value reporting. They are great for that sort of thing, but not so good for that real-time video and voice. So what does that do when you're thinking about how you design for each of these states? And then we have the static website and app side. The countries that, or states that have a linkage up to a geostationary satellite that has to send data 38,000 kilometers up and 38,000 kilometers down. That really impacts how quickly you can get content to and from these particular states. Now that's great for a static website. Let's wait for a few moments for something to load and I'll get the information, a Wikipedia. Or it could also be an email, or it could be a records update into a records system. That may mean, for example, that flow rate I was talking about earlier, coming from that country and every hour or so throwing a small file up into a server somewhere else, maybe in New Zealand, for that reporting. Now, as you can see, this is patchy at best. Some of the great things that are happening in this space is the Vanuatu fibre optic cable is just coming live over the last few months, and the Cook Islands has access over the Vanuatu fibre optic cable. So they're green and blue lines will shrink, things will become faster. That also extends out into Niue as well, and connects Samoa and French Polynesia into existing networks. So there is some of that dynamic, or that additional capability coming on stream. This will also hit a number of other states across, or hit is probably the wrong word, but benefit a number of other states over the next 2 to 3 years as new strands of fibre come to them all. Notable exceptions are Tuvalu and Nauru, where there is no plan for fibre optic connection across into each of these sites. They will stay satellite connected for the foreseeable future. So if there are programs being delivered into each of these states, what does that mean when you're trying to connect digitally? Now, if we move into the next step, because I've talked a little bit around about the net or the tapestry, that virtual tapestry that connects the states together, fibre, satellite. What happens when we get to the last mile? What do people use? How do they use it? If I'm in a state such as Samoa, do I go to a laptop or do I go to a phone? Is that phone connected to the internet, or is it the phone that I use to make calls on or text my friends using SMS? This piece of information that was pulled from multiple sources, because one of the big challenges that we've had is finding the information from a source. Go to a global database and there isn't the global information. It focuses on the first world and then other states that they can get information from easily. So having a look into other sources, we've been able to scan each of these states and see that many of the states have a mobile first connectivity. That means people will go to a mobile before they go anywhere near some form of computer device. Now, the reason that this particular piece of information is significant is that we've mapped that from March of 2020 through October 2020. Now, the Pacific is normally a tourist mecca, and in this time frame there have been no tourists, so we get a very clear understanding of what the people in the country actually use without that tourist data skewing the information. So we're we have pretty high certainty that this is what the situation is on the ground. Now, if you're designing for somewhere like Kiribati or Samoa or any of the other states that are in the green zone, design for access around mobiles. What does that mean? Well, for an education program, for example, in the green zone, you may design an experiential education program where someone might have a phone with a camera on it that you may go and ask them to experience their environment. Take a photo of your local beach. Tell me what that is, write a story about it. Whereas in a blue zone country, say for example Tokalo, you may design for a static education or a lesson-based approach where the lessons may be packaged up, sent off onto a website, and people would fill it out on their computer and then send it back. So it may be a more tell me about pedagogical approach. All of these things are really important to consider, and that does depend on those environmental factors. Now, something else that was interesting when we did this research was a comparison between the number of mobile phones per head, i.e. 100% mobile saturation or less, versus the number of people who actually access the internet. And what we found is that there are many more mobile phones than there are internet users. So again, how does this play into program design or delivery? How does this play into actually connecting to people and engaging in talanoa? Well, if, for example, you had a system where you noted a tsunami early warning system, now that may be coming from feeds all across the Pacific and may be something you need to communicate out to your people in the state that you're in. If you did that purely with people with internet access, you would not meet half of them in many of these states. So, okay, well, then how do we do that? We design both for a digital internet-based notification, and we also design for an SMS-based notification. So again, it's a lot of this research is, okay, how do we tailor what we do to meet the needs in our states? Now, cost. This is a great big blob of blue and green and grey. I'll walk you through this and tell the story. This graph shows you the comparative cost of 1 gigabyte of data, which if you think of, if you're lucky enough to have something like Netflix or something in your lives, this would probably be around about 40 minutes of a movie. So if you're watching 40 minutes of a movie over your mobile phone in the Federated States of Micronesia, that would cost you $80 US. Whereas in Fiji, it would cost you 41 cents. The green in the graph is states that rely heavily on satellite. The blue is the states that rely on fibre optic cabling. So if I was designing a program for Fiji, it may be quite richly digitally enabled. Whereas in the Federated States of Micronesia, if I was a CSO, the internet may not be my first port of call because of the high cost of data. It may be more designed around local engagement. So how do we fund that, and what do we do to continue the program journey? Now, unfortunately, it gets a little worse, because if we look at the graph on the left, the blue bars are the gross national income of each country. If I took typical usage per day, per year of US internet data usage, is around about 6,000 gigabytes, and map that against the costs that we've just shown before, that maps to the green line. And what you can see is there's many orders of magnitudes difference of cost versus income. So can people actually afford to engage with lots of data? I would suggest not necessarily, and it is something you need to work with your CSOs or local partners in the Pacific about. How much information can we share digitally? Now, there's also this opportunity around data itself. In New Zealand, you may very well have a data package connected to your mobile phone. You may or may not know how much data that is. Let's say you had a 10 gigabyte data package and you may or may not use it. If we commoditize, if we think of that as a commodity, because we don't really think about it, it's like food, we need it, we eat it. And I know I'm talking from a New Zealand perspective here. What if there was an opportunity to take that commodity and give a little bit of that back? Maybe let's say we gave it 1 gigabyte back. Well, if we gave 1 gigabyte back at $6 US dollars per gigabyte, that'd be a package cost for 10 gigs of $60. We could give back $6 worth of that, and the provider might lose 10%. But if we look at the cost of that gigabyte in US dollars across each of these beneficiary countries, many of them have a lower cost per gigabyte. So we may be giving 10% back to the customer. Actually, we're only spending a small margin of that if we gift that into the Cook Islands, Fiji, Samoa, Tahiti, or Vanuatu. Now that's an opportunity, because once we take data from being something we treasure to something of a commodity, what does that do to a donor community? Does that mean that we open up a different donor community? Does that mean that we can share in different types of conversations? And when we give that data to a state, Does that mean that maybe we can give it to an education program and give a school free education? Does that mean that we can give it to a disaster organisation that can share data in emergency situations? You know, these are some of the opportunities that could come from a program or donor design perspective. Now, the other challenge and opportunity we have is this is all new, and as data increases, the people's engagement in the internet, organisations and states are trying to work out how to manage this. Voices become heard that may not have been heard before. Things may get said that may not have been said before. And these are things that, if we look at the Facebook bans across Piango member states, or at least considerations of bans, that have come and gone throughout member states since 2015. Now, when we think of program design, and if we think, okay, well, we have a small group of people here in New Zealand designing and co-designing this program with our partners in the Pacific. If we lose Facebook, what does that do? So designing programs around the program itself and what you're looking to deliver with content off of these apps, and then being able to place them on the apps is something that you probably need to consider, because Facebook may be there one day, Twitter may be the next thing, Snapchat may be the thing after that. So bear in mind when you're designing programs, it needs to be able to move across platforms rather quickly based on the changing scenarios in the states you're working in. Another opportunity is you may think of designing your own app or your own website. I would suggest, based on the size of the sector in New Zealand, that focusing more on program content and delivery is a better bang for your buck. If you go on focusing on building an app with the average size of INGOs in New Zealand, you're going to be distracted from your core purposes. Use what's there and use it to your best advantage. Look at what's popular in your current states that you're working in, look at what's popular across your partners, and work with them to build that engagement. I'll just quickly touch on this before I wrap up. There are a number of policy opportunities for digital access. If I look at what digital access and the SDGs, strongly connects into industry, innovation and infrastructure. Indicator 9C is something that, if I look at the Pacific, the world has missed an opportunity in. And let's see what we can do to bring that back into the conversation. The Samoa pathway, we're over 5 years into the Samoa pathway. A strong focus on sustainability and the needs of small island developing states across Piango. One thing that has dropped from the conversation that is in the Samoa pathway is the digital and technology part of the conversation. What can we do as CSOs, INGOs, and other people who are heavily invested and invited to the Talanoa on the Samoa pathway to bring and digital back to that conversation? Sustainability and digital. For example, if there is an organisation that has created a storm surge monitoring system for most recently Jakarta, and they use Twitter to tell people when storm surges are coming up and through the creeks and rivers in Jakarta. So that's working with climate change and using digital to notify people of the issue. Also thinking about where digital touches the strategic results framework. It touches in proportion of population covered by a mobile network. It touches in proportion of individuals using the internet, those two indicators I showed you earlier. How can you weave that into your program stories to access funding to meet these indicators? And lastly, and potentially, well, definitely worryingly for me, is that many of the states in the Piango region are well below the e-government development index. And that's, I understand there are opportunities around the size of the size of the state and available resources to do things. What is the digital opportunity for us to get working with these organisations? I know the Pacific Whale in New Zealand is working in this area to improve e-government development. What can we automate? What are things that we can do to help us shift up this e-government development index graph? I just want to wrap up with noting that everyone needs connection, to learn to grow and to challenge their status quo. The challenge I lay out is that it's evident that digital access is needed throughout Piango member organisations, and that they're underserved or priced out of meaningfully engaging in the talanoa on the virtual tapestry. International funding intention to improve digital foundations will assist in aligning this cost and potentially providing the benefit. The other opportunity is to bring digital access back to conversations they were started in, and really highlight the opportunity here. There are a number of supranational conversations going on that we can definitely feed into. But most importantly, digital access needs to stay open in the same way that trade routes need to stay open. In the times of COVID-19 and possibly beyond, this is a conduit for the talanoa to continue. Thank you.
Kia ora, Darrin. That was, fantastic. Just so useful for all of us. And I know there's a lot of questions coming up. So I thought let's just get the feedback started. And I'd like to come to Jackie first from Specific Consultancy, because I know Jackie was the first person who came to us at CID and raised this as a core issue. As you just said, Darrin, being priced out of engagement is just not acceptable now, and even more so post-COVID. So Jackie, you've raised a few questions and comments in the chat room. Would you like to take the floor and say a few comments and maybe ask a question?
Talofa lava, everyone. Thank you to Council for International Development for organising this talanoa, and I really acknowledge your work, Darrin. I know when you reached out to me last year, we couldn't quite connect and gather any in-depth data, but thank you very much for taking on the feedback and comments which I had raised. My experience is very much in the Samoa market, so I wouldn't be able to pretend to speak for other Pacific countries, although I just know from having family and friends in other Pacific countries what the capabilities and issues are around connectivity. But I mean, I can speak to Samoa and what's happening there and give some context to, I guess, what happened post-COVID last year. So thank you very much. And again, acknowledge your work there, Darrin, in bringing out all these statistics. I have been doing a lot of research for one of my clients is actually a Samoan-owned ISP company in the Pacific, in Samoa specifically. So they've I guess they've been in the market for 5+ years, so they really understand what's going on in that particular market. I just wanted to start off, I guess, by commenting on the cables. Now, I know from a perspective, especially from, government ministries in countries like Australia and New Zealand have invested a lot in these cables. So I just wanted to give a reality of what it's like on the ground, that cables does not automatically dropping a cable into an island does not automatically mean that the connectivity is going to improve. It very much depends on the infrastructure provided by the providers in that country. And because those providers are commercial companies, sometimes what you might read in high-level reports may not actually be what's been rolled out on the ground. If I use this Samoa as an example, a lot of the promotions in Samoa at the moment are claiming 4G has been fully rolled out across Samoa. For example, one of the providers, I don't want to mention names because that's not what it's about today, has said that they have 100 sites on 4G. However, I know through just testing that and knowledge on the ground that that's not the case. So the cables really are only able to be fully utilized if the infrastructure in country is upgraded. And so that is one area that I believe is very important for funders. And given that delivery of programs, which is one of the main topics coming up today, given the audience today, the realities of being able to deliver programs digitally, it's a very different story when you're talking to people in government departments that have that access, but actually rolling it out to our grassroots community is a different story. And I just wanted to be really open and frank about that. And just, you know, being open as NGOs, you know, obviously, and working in with organizations like Piango, each country will have their own challenges. And it's very important to have a country by country approach. So it's great, Darrin, that you brought up the different statistics in terms of price of data, latency speeds, because it is very different. And also, as Darrin has mentioned, the information available online, I've found the best source myself has been GSMA. But even then, it really, some of that data is now outdated, and now we're in post-COVID. I think there's a real need as well, if I may say, to refresh a lot of that data that's available in a lot of the GSMA and other reports online. So that's possibly another area that especially countries like Australia and New Zealand would really be money well invested to have up-to-date research post-COVID on where are things at in terms of latency, digital connectivity. So I just wanted to make that point because I know there's a lot of talk about the cables, but I can tell you in Samoa, the cables hit in 2017 and not that much changed, to be honest. And again, because we're working, just always remembering we're working with commercial service providers, they've made huge investments in previous years into 2G, 3G infrastructure. So unless they get funded to fully upgrade, they're going to make commercial decisions about investments that they've made. And so that also delays the rollout of the capability of the cables in these countries. And then you come to countries like Cook Islands, for example, that don't have competition, just have one service provider given size of market. Again, it really depends on the service provider and country and the investment they're willing to make and the return on investment. So that these are the real on the ground aspects that are happening. And the area that I'm really focused on with my clients at the moment is really around servicing the rural, remote, and underserved areas. Now, cable is a great solution for urban areas. However, even in New Zealand, we know that there are still areas in New Zealand which are not covered. And this is very much the case in remote and rural areas in Samoa. So the client that I'm working with has partnered with Pacific, who I'm sure those of you that are in this space will be familiar with. And those secondary solutions really need to be supported, because I understand that countries like Australia and New Zealand have made investment into these cables, and sometimes there's a bit of hesitancy to bring in satellite capability because then it kind of makes the cable look bad or make it look like it's not doing the job it was supposed to do, and it's such a huge investment. However, I think in order to move forward, there needs to be I guess a change in the attitude towards satellite, because some of the rural and remote villages, which some of your NGOs may be trying to reach, they will just never get the benefits of the cable. And we know that from rural New Zealand, and they won't be able to afford what, you know, some of the farming businesses, for example, here in New Zealand, have to lay down their own cables and roll out to actually get access to that level of connectivity. So satellite is such an important solution for the Pacific, and I find that sometimes political agendas and also the corporate companies which very much want to promote the cable and their 4G or 3G networks. Sometimes satellite is seen as a threat to that status quo, and I really would encourage satellite to be a real option. It's not to take over the job of the cables, but in reality, if we look at Cook Islands, again, as another example, the outlying islands, they're never going to get access to the cable. So satellite, which Pacific, just as an example of one company, I know there's other satellite companies out there. It's really needed. It's not really like a nice to have. Given the current COVID environment, if we want to deliver programs digitally into the Pacific, we need to support the Pacific first to be digitally enabled. Otherwise, we can come up with all the fancy apps and the digital programs and sit on the other side of this computer and want to deliver amazing programs, and whether it's direct to the people in need, or whether it's capability building for, as was mentioned, localization and providing skills for local NGOs to deliver. But even then, some of them, even though they may be in urban areas, may still have connectivity issues. And another point I wanted to make was cost of data definitely needs to be factored into programs. I think before it was a nice to have, but now, you know, just to download an app in a country like Samoa, which is actually, as you could see in the previous graphs, is one of the better off countries in terms of latency and cost as well. But just to ask consumers to download apps that are not Facebook or the common ones, it's actually a huge cost, and a lot of them they just won't do it. The last point I wanted to make, which I'm not sure if it's occurring in other countries, but some of the service providers actually block certain apps as well and give priority to apps like Facebook and YouTube, for example. So even surfing on the internet for some of our people in the islands it's not a thing. It's very normal for us. But in the islands, I know in Samoa, they're so familiar with Facebook that Facebook to them is the internet. So there also needs to be some room to understand the I guess, what is internet in these islands, and what do they actually think internet is. If I can finish off, I delivered a program before COVID in Samoa. Thankfully, I'm still able to travel there. A digital marketing program for the tourism industry, and basically, yeah, when I went to Savaii in particular, the tourism businesses there, their staff had never seen a website before, first time. But luckily, we had the support of Samoa Tourism Authority. They provided devices. For some of them, it was the first time they'd touch a computer, let alone seen the website, let alone seen the website of the property that they work for. So these are just some of the real stories that I wanted to share about the realities on the ground. And again, I think it's really important for NGOs that are wanting to develop and deliver digital programs to really find information. Don't just rely on your government ministry partners, because sometimes the information you might get might not be fully accurate, and then you invest in a program and it doesn't quite get rolled out. I know there was comments earlier about digital education in Samoa, for example, which is a very hot political topic in Samoa at the moment. So again, it's about really doing your research and finding the right NGO partners, as well as not just working with the government ministries, but finding a good local NGO partner who can help you deliver on the ground that has that local knowledge. And again, sometimes it might differ from island to island. Some have better connections in some islands and communities than others. So anyway, I probably talked way too long. So my apologies to take so much time. It's an area I'm so passionate about, and I just acknowledge again, Darrin, your work in this space, and just look forward to further contributing and working together to improve digital for our Pacific region. Whakatai lava.
Kia ora, Jackie. That was you covered the areas that many have covered in the questions about you know, the importance of rural and urban coverage and the importance of satellites, and of course the barrier of cost for data. So before I turn to you, Darrin, to sort of sum up, I just want to see if anybody else. We've had a few questions from Janice, Marie, Rob, Karen, and Anne. If any of you want to contribute briefly or ask a sort of supplementary question to Jackie's comments, which is covered, you've covered so much of it anyway, Jackie. Does anybody want to add something?
I will. Thanks, Jackie, for your information. It's very informative. It's Janice here from Child Fund. So my question is, I know you touched on that in Samoa, it takes a wee while for, I guess, the 2G, 3Gs to really transform locally. Do you have an idea how long it usually takes? So, you know, the telcos that start putting in infrastructure, does it take a good 5 years, 10 years? Any idea how long it will take?
Yeah, thank you. It really depends on the telco and the investment that they've made into the infrastructure that they currently have. Some of the recent changes, I'm not sure if you're familiar. For example, Blue Sky was recently bought out by Vodafone for quite a significant sum. And I think that really has a bearing on the timeline for them because they've just invested. Well, I guess it's public knowledge, so I guess I can just give an approximate number. I think it was 80 US, 80 mil US, and that was for 4 countries. But obviously they would want to see a return on investment before they would fully upgrade. They have started upgrading, and they've made a commitment to it under the Samoa, the plan which Darrin mentioned. But I would say realistically, it's going to take at least another 1-2 years for service providers in this, and I'm only talking about Samoa here, to actually upgrade their infrastructure. But realistically, some of the villages in the rural areas, their populations are so small that I cannot see them upgrading fully to 4G, to be honest. That's my opinion. If there was a provider here, they might jump in and say otherwise. But yeah, and this is I guess when it's not the government that owns the infrastructure, it's really up to commercial companies to make those decisions, and it's, you know, rightfully so, going to be based on bottom line. So it's a very, I guess, delicate balancing act. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Any quick comment from anybody else, from Rob or Marie? Otherwise, I'll get Darrin to respond to all of these issues and to do a final sum up.
This is Anne here. I just wanted to note that maybe because we're from a small NGO, we work with rural communities. It's going to take a while before the rural communities can engage in this digital era. What do we do in the meantime other than waiting for the digital connectivity to come? So we found the real issues in trying to find solutions to bridge. So if we are fully digitized on this side, and we have our partners in the Pacific, and we have our rural partners or communities that might even be further away also from the Pacific partners that we work with, what do we do in the meantime? So we were looking at, like, how can we do guided facilitation of e-things, but also in the rural areas where people find it difficult to share things to electronic means. We did our connectivity because pool size top up is so extremely expensive. Nobody ever has top up to see or share anything. We find that using these apps where you can swap data from phone to phone worked really well. So when we develop, for instance, songs and materials, and when you then tap other phones, then it gets spread and people can then share it to other people. So finding solutions like that to bridge the gap that I think would be really interesting to look at this point, because it's going to take years before, if ever, where the digital divide will be bridged.
Kia ora, Anne. In fact, Darrin, maybe if we come to you now, and I guess the question is, given Anne's comments just then, what is the first thing we do right now? We know what the long-term solution is. What can we do right now? What would be the thing that you would prioritise from donors and INGO sector?
Having sort of birthed this report, because it did feel like a bit of a birth out of my head. The one hope I had was that it sparked conversation. And I'm really pleased to hear the conversation in this forum. And that's what I hope comes into conversation as we leave this forum. Digital is something that is an opportunity for some. As Jackie has said and Anne has said, it may not be an opportunity now for others. There is so much that could be done with digital if we keep it in the conversation, if we keep it almost as front of mind as some of the things that affect our existence as people and the existence of our planet. It is, I see it as a conduit, and I've said this also in the conclusion. Completely hear everything that Jackie is saying. I didn't touch on e-resilience here, but it is in my report. You know, that is something that a lot of the connections across the Pacific and into Pacific states, they are either non-existent or not resilient. We need to think about that when we have those digital conversations too. An example from last Friday, the tsunami alerts that came out from New Zealand. Just tracking out of personal interest, the tsunami wave patterns on the Niue website. All of the New Zealand meters were working. The Rail Island connector stopped working at the time of the second earthquake. That's what I'm talking about. You know, how do we continue to keep digital in our conversation streams? It's been beneficial to many of us probably on this call over the last 12 months. Hopefully it's been beneficial to stay in connection and across programs. Digital isn't just about connected over the internet, and you know, I welcome Anne's comments around how digital devices can be used to share information without internet connection. All of these things are innovative, all of these things are new, and you know, if we share them as a connected group of people in the CID forum, in the Piango forum, and in our government and university forums, digital can stay part of that conversation. And if anything comes out of this report, if the conversation continues, that would be a great win.
Darrin, fantastic work, really helpful, really informative and practical stuff that we can actually act on. And I know that just to sum up very quickly, we are getting indications from our Piango colleagues and Pacific colleagues that digital connectivity is the priority post-COVID, because it's the conduit to addressing all the issues that are urgent. And so I think we must keep it in the forefront of the conversation. And as Jackie has just said too, in the chat room, there are quick wins. We can get a satellite into country within 1 or 2 weeks. We can get governments to fund data for a particular event or conference or workshop or whatever it is. We try to do that with the Oceania conference. So we can do some quick wins on this. as well as focus on the long-term viability, whether it be a mix of fibre and satellite in the long term. But it is a priority. It's urgent. So we will continue to make that case to donors and our members. And in the meantime, thank you for your work, Darrin. It's been great working with you, and to partnership with Jackie as well at Specific Consultancy on this, and to all of you for joining in the session. And we will, Darrin's report is on our website. We will send a link through to all of you as well, but keep in touch. And if you want to connect with each other on this issue, we can do that too after this talk. So kia ora, Darrin, thank you very much. Thanks to everybody, and ka kite anō, have a good day and see you soon.
You too.